Hi, I'm Adam Shepherd.
And I'm Jane McCallion.
And you're listening to the ITPro Podcast, where this week we're trying something a little bit different. For the next 4 weeks, we'll be making a change to our regular format, dropping our weekly news roundup and focusing instead on deep dives into the most important and interesting IT issues of the moment. This is just a test, but we're keen to hear from you. If you like the new in-depth format or want us to go back to how it was before, let us know. You can contact us via social media or by emailing podcast@itpro.co.uk, and we encourage you to get in touch.
We're looking forward to getting our teeth into some really complex debates, and for our first in-depth discussion, we're looking at the recent exam results debacle and asking, is AI the snake oil of the 21st century? In case you've been living under a rock, the past couple of weeks have seen outcry from students after the results of their A-level exams were determined by algorithm due to COVID making traditional tests impossible. This resulted in eyebrow-raising results, like A-star grade students being dished out straight Bs, kids predicted Cs were instead getting Us, while some children from high-achieving schools were predicted Us but given Bs. And these are just a handful of examples. The impact was felt up and down the country and led to massive student protests. Less than a week after the results were issued, the government was forced to backtrack, announcing the algorithm-generated results would be scrapped in favour of predicted grades from teachers. But why did the government's AI system get it so badly wrong? And what can it teach us about the role of AI in modern business? So first of all, Adam, let's look at what AI is actually good at.
AI is good at a couple of really quite specific things. We've covered in previous episodes the differences between what AI as it stands today actually is and what many people kind of assume that AI can do. But really the core things that AI is really sophisticated at is pattern recognition and anomaly detection, which makes it very good for things like security, identifying anomalous activity on corporate network domains, which can indicate the presence of an attacker. It also makes it quite good at machine vision, which fuels things like driverless cars and imaging in the field of medicine, for example, looking at anomalies in X-ray data and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think the kind of mantra would be things that are predictable, things that are repeatable, things that are specific. And that last word there is quite important. What we have now, and what you alluded to, is specific AI. So you can apply it to certain things and it does them really well. So you end up with sort of really impressive sounding things like AlphaGo, the Alphabet created Go playing software, which is better than any human. But that's brilliant. But if I asked it to cook my dinner, that's not going to work. So I think that like you say, application to certain areas is key, and it needs to be properly trained. With security, for example, if it is trained, given lots of data on what is normal, what people normally do, and continuously fed that data, getting continuous positive feedback, then it becomes much more useful at detecting, like you say, anomalies, whether that is a malicious actor, whether that is actually just a software problem, a glitch somewhere, or whether that's somebody trying to hack in. And it can do that better than humans who are just looking at the data, but it does that by flagging to humans that's kind of that they need to act.
Now, from that, you may think that AI is the perfect system to apply to something like determining students' final grades based on things like their predicted grades and previous exam performance, and indeed the previous exam performance of other years. But there are actually a number of reasons that AI is ill-suited to this task, and the big one is the variance that can exist within that data set.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there are kind of several problems here. I get the impression that it was kind of rushed out the door when they're thinking, what do we do? What do we do here? And something that's come up within the space of sort of 6 weeks, maybe a couple of months, is just not going to be good enough. And I've seen it said elsewhere that effectively it penalises improvement, if you like. If it's fed long-term data for a school that for many, many years was underachieving, but more recently has started to make improvements, what it will take from that data is that this school is underachieving. It will look at the broader spectrum of it, not what's happened recently, and act accordingly, which is how you end up with the students who are predicted, A's, B's, even C's, being downgraded several grades, C students getting U's, and is also what has caused the other way, teachers, telling the exam boards, no, these kids, they're going to get a U, they're probably not even going to sit the exam, but the algorithm taking into account that this is a high achieving school, and therefore students who sit this exam normally get whatever, so even if they're at the bottom of the curve, they will get a C. And I can see the rationale for using it. I can see the rationale because it looks like it's unbiased. And as somebody who outperformed my teacher's predicted grades, because we're all humans, we all have biases. I can see the logic of it, looking at it, kind of going, well, this is a fair and impartial way of doing it, but it's just not. Like you say, it doesn't take into account individuals' performance, on the day, even their performance more recently, because it looks at the whole of that school, not each child individually and how they have done previously. And I think that's ultimately the problem, that they've thrown this algorithm, this AI, at this issue, hoping to fix what is actually a very complicated problem, being all kind of like, whoa, AI is magic, and it's not. And they ended up with a massive problem that has created additional problems with regards to university places, which is still not solved. So it's probably not worth getting too deeply into that, especially given we're a technology podcast.
Another issue is that it doesn't take into account the improvements on an individual level. So if a student has gotten, let's say, consistently C's and D's throughout their predicted grades, their mock exams, previous exam results, what have you, and then they kind of put in a ton of work and, study and revise and cram and all the rest of it, and they bump their predicted grade up to an A or a B, an AI system is going to look at that and see an outlier, is going to see an anomaly and go, right, well, based on the rest of the data, this is a fluke, so we're gonna reward the grade based on previous performance, which would make it a C or a D, which is just inherently unfair. It feels like pulling the rug out from under students at the last kind of possible moment, and sort of undoes all of the work that they've done in the last kind of 6 to 9 months leading up to the final results.
Yeah, but I guess the only way to overcome that would be to have everybody sit their exams in September, whenever. That raises additional issues that, once again, I'm not sure we have the scope to get into here. But I do agree with what you're saying. Now, this is not the only time that AI has been flung at something and not worked out. We've previously seen with facial recognition, AI is almost universally bad at it, and the darker the pigment of your skin, the worse it gets. And then you also get, in that vein, you get biases entering into the situation. For example, say a facial recognition algorithm may be used by police, and indeed was, and there have been court cases involved in that as well.
As we spoke about last week.
Indeed, as we spoke about last week. And what that will have taken into account is, say, the data to do with the amount that people are arrested, the amount of people who are just stopped without being arrested, and we'll kind of go, oh well, black men are stopped and searched by police more frequently, therefore black men should be stopped and searched by police more frequently, and it's just reinforcing problems that are already there. And that's kind of the problem here as well. It's it's a bit different, but once again, it's reinforcing the idea that all students from high achieving schools will do well, irrespective of the case of the individual student, and all students in this particular area, this particular school, will do badly. And it's discriminatory, effectively.
Yeah, it's through use of incomplete or biased data, or just the wrong data sets for that use case. It can really entrench faulty conclusions and false premises.
One slightly kind of lighter insight into how AI and machine learning can totally misinterpret data is the wonderful blog AI Weirdness, which is from a research scientist in optics called Janelle Shane. Her blog is called AI Weirdness, and she uses machine learning in a kind of fairly humorous context to come up with the names of guinea pigs, for example, or to write fan fiction. And we'll leave some links because it's very funny in my opinion. But for example, it came up with a Victoria sandwich cake by Mary Berry. It at least has learned, what ingredients should look like. Softened butter, caster sugar. I'm a baker. Looking at the amounts here, there. It's kind of more or less along the right lines, but it gets itself into a loop of the instructions just start to go wrong, and the more wrong they go, the worse it gets. And then it gets itself caught into a loop where it's talking about cutting things into triangles. It's just like, brush with buttercream and trim the triangles into one more segment. Brush with buttercream and trim the triangles into one final segment, and just keeps going like that. And it's a recognizable recipe at some point, but it just kind of doesn't understand how things should end, evidently. And it's funny when it's not deciding other people's futures, I think is what I'm trying to say.
And I think that's the key point for me. AI is very skilled at providing insights, but ultimately AI systems should not be left to make decisions on their own. AI should never have the final say in what happens with anything really, because AI at the moment can't be trusted to come to a correct conclusion. It's absolutely invaluable for providing additional insight and crunching through data, but it doesn't yet have the fine-tuned intelligence to actually make those decisions. I mean, we've seen it time and time again with things like the Home Office's AI system for determining visas, which was, surprise, surprise, determined to be racially biased. We've seen it with facial recognition systems, as you mentioned earlier. We've seen it time and time again where AI has been left to its own devices, effectively, and has come to faulty conclusions. And that can be, as benign as predicting the wrong kind of stock levels needed for, a logistics firm, or it can be something with actual harmful effects on the lives of the people that it's making decisions on behalf of.
Yeah, long-lasting ones as well. And I agree 100%. It needs to inform human decisions. And I think that, as I said towards the beginning, there is just this tendency to think of artificial intelligence, possibly because it has the word intelligence in there, as being almost godlike, like magic, like super brain stuff. And it's not. It's just software.
Really not.
It's just software.
I think one of the key points is AI is increasingly being used by people who don't understand it. Not people who, don't know all of the technical workings and, how the model is specifically trained and all that stuff, but people who, on a fundamental level, don't have a grasp of what AI is, what it can do, and how it works. So, people do just because a lot of AI are these black box systems that that aren't really particularly clear on how they work, and also because the level of general knowledge about AI is still quite low. A lot of these systems end up being run by people who don't understand them.
Yeah, and I think it kind of requires a level of self-knowledge. Even as a tech journalist who has written about this, and I would hope that I have some grasp. I would not claim to be an expert on AI, and for example, I wouldn't claim to be an expert on CRISPR either. It's super useful, as I understand it, in science and genetics and stuff. Really, really exciting technology. I'm not going to be kind of like, right, let's apply it to me, please, if you wouldn't mind. I fancy being a blonde now, which, for those of you who haven't seen me, I have very dark brown hair. But yeah, because that, to the best of my understanding, isn't how it works. And, I don't want AI to decide my dinner recipe this evening either, for, I think, well-founded reasons. And there's, like I say, that kind of level of self-awareness that actually you don't understand this fully, and that you need to perhaps take a step back, do a bit more consultation, some dispassionate consultation, and not rush things out the door when they are making absolutely critical decisions. And that humans and machines work best together. And that it is a decision-making tool, but it's not a final decision-making tool. That the final decisions should be made by humans, because software is fallible. I'm sorry, but that's the way that it is.
Just as an aside, imagine how much of a kick in the teeth this would be if you were planning to go to university to study AI and computer science and were told by an algorithm that you weren't able to.
I tell you what, if this was me back when I did my A-Levels, so I went to a grammar school and was fairly average achieving there. For sixth form, I was at grammar school. And this would have so I got BBC, which is kind of, fairly all right grades, got the B's in the things that were important. But this would have been like, congratulations on your 3 straight A stars, Jay McCallion. Because you go to school with a bunch of smart girls, and it doesn't matter that compared to them, you're an idiot.
So, what can businesses take away from this? As more businesses and more organizations in general start looking at how AI can be applied to their own operations, what can this teach us about, if you like, how not to do it?
I think that the main thing is sort of, just don't let it loose on everything. Start small scale, stuff that's not super important, I think. And just make sure that you kind of keep an eye on it. Get to know how it works.
Know its limitations, crucially.
Yeah. And, there will be sort of snake oil salesmen out there who will tell you that AI will solve all your business problems and, it's really great and you can get rid of half of your workforce and blah, blah, blah. And that's not how it works. If anything, you need additional people with newer skills to actually oversee what it does. Because, in the same way that if you've got cruise control on your car, you're coming up behind a slow-moving vehicle, you're not going to be kind of like, well, it's okay, I'm going at the right speed because I have cruise control on and this is a 60-mile-an-hour limit place. That's a bad way to apply that particular software, that particular solution. And
I think that's a really good analogy as well, because if you look at Tesla and other cars with what's regularly referred to as self-driving features, none of them are actually self-driving. You still need to keep your hands on the wheel and keep an eye on the road, because there is only so much they can do. And if you don't have your eyes on the road and your hands on the wheel, you are going to crash, which I think is about as apt a metaphor for the current exam debacle as you're likely to get.
Indeed.
Well, that's all we've got time for in this week's show. Once again, we will be trialling this new in-depth format for the next 3 shows after this. Please do let us know what you think. Get in touch with any thoughts or feedback. We'd love to hear from you.
You can find links to everything we've spoken about today in the show notes and even more on our website www.itpro.co.uk. You can also follow us on Twitter, where we're at ITPro, as well as Facebook and LinkedIn. And we would also like to offer our best wishes and good luck to any A-level students who are listening, and indeed their families. Please do subscribe to the ITPro Podcast wherever you get your podcasts to never miss an episode, and we'll be back next week with more in-depth analysis from the world of IT. But until then, goodbye.
Bye. The ITPro Podcast is brought to you by the Dennis Podcast Network.